You know that sound a big room makes when it inhales? Not the applause, not the clink of glass. I mean the hush, like velvet being pulled across a window. That's the sound the grand hall made the second the dare landed. If you can make this crowd stand in silence, I'll buy you the most expensive instrument in the world. And your freedom from this job. The voice carried clean, the way wealth carries, without raising itself. Heads turned as if a string ran from the mic to every jaw in the room. The chandeliers hung like upside-down gardens. Cameras lifted. Laughter did what it always does first in places like this. Tested the air, then spread because it felt safe. He was halfway behind a rolling case when it happened. A man in a plain black work jacket with a strip of reflector tape across the shoulder, push cart, gaffer's tape, a coil of XLR. That was the image the room saw. His name, though most of them didn't know it, was Samuel Price. "Go on," someone near the stage said, bright and careless, the kind of careless that thinks it's charming. "Give the man a moment in the lights." He didn't move at first. The cart stayed between his hands, and for a heartbeat you could imagine he'd just keep walking, like the dare had whistled past his ear. Then he looked up. Not at the woman who'd said it, Eleanor Voss, pearls like frost at her throat, but at the violin case on the velvet stand behind her. Brown wood, old hinges. The kind of case you don't open without feeling you owe somebody something. "I'm sorry," he said, almost automatically, to no one particular, and to everyone. People who say sorry for taking up hallway space say it that way, a small word sent out like a scout. Eleanor smiled the way people smile when a camera is nearby. "We're all friends here," she said, which is a sentence that only makes sense if you've never had a door shut in your face. Closer to the floor, among the staff, a whisper sliced sideways. "Sam, don't!" A woman in a server's black vest breathed. She didn't look at him. She looked at the floor, at the rim of a tray. "Please don't make a thing." There it was, the little betrayal that isn't really betrayal, just fear dressed as courtesy. It pricks, even when you understand it. A cluster of donors laughed politely, the way people laugh at a gala when they think the script is under control. Phones were already up, front row, back row, balcony, like tulips craning for light. A red tally light blinked on a handheld live stream rig. The hashtag formed before the story did. That's how modern nights work. Eleanor tapped the mic head with a knuckle. "We're celebrating the arts, aren't we? What's more artistic than a challenge?" She turned toward the stand. "My board purchased this instrument for display, insured for more than my first apartment building. You make this hall stand in silence for 1 full minute. No chatter, no glasses, no coughs. And I'll put that instrument in your hands. And I'll buy out your hours for a year. How's that for freedom?" Murmurs warmed. Words like freedom hit differently depending on your shift. Samuel set the cart brake with his heel. You could hear it click. He wiped a line of dust from his sleeve, a reflex so practiced it had become a habit he didn't notice. The security guard nearest the stage took 2 absent-minded steps to the left, doing that choreographed thing where you look casual while calculating. "Sir," the guard began, more to the air than to Samuel, "the stage is for performers," someone supplied, smiling blades. "Exactly. We'll see if he is one." Behind Samuel, the loading doors stood shut and soundproofed. Behind them, another world. Concrete echo, coffee breath, crew jokes, and that particular smell cables have when they've warmed under lights. In that world, he belonged. In this one, he had a lanyard. There's a difference. Eleanor's eyes never left him. Not cruel exactly. Something sharper than that. An interest trimmed in control. "Well?" she asked, and the words slid across the marble like a coin. Samuel lifted one palm, a tiny gesture asking the room to wait. He wasn't dramatic about it. No square jaw, no sudden fire. Just a man who'd been told to move out of frames learning, for once, to remain in one. "Let me make sure I understand," he said. His voice was steady, a radio voice with a bit of midnight shift in it. "If I can make this crowd stand in silence for a minute." 60 seconds, she said. "Not a generous estimate. A minute is a minute. You'll buy me an instrument." "The best," she said. "Whatever the market declares the best this season. My team will find it, and will cover your wages elsewhere for a year." She smiled at the donors. "Philanthropy has to be nimble, doesn't it?" The room gave the laugh that sentence was designed to earn. "And my freedom from this job," Samuel said, returning her earlier wording to its sender. His eyes touched the velvet stand again. If you were close, you saw his throat work once. Not fear, not yet, something older. Someone in the second row cupped a hand. "Play the fiddle, buddy, or do you only tune microphones?" The voice held the sing-song of people who have never eaten their pride on a Tuesday. Samuel turned his head enough to show he'd heard. "My name is Samuel," he said, easy, not stiff. Just a correction put on the table like a glass of water, in case anyone else was thirsty. The laugh that tried to get born there died early. From the staff line, another whisper, this one sharper. "Sam, please, we need the hours." That wasn't betrayal, that was rent. He looked at the server who'd said it. No eye roll, no frown. He gave her back a tiny nod that meant I know. Then he stepped out from behind the cart, fingers smoothing the front of the work jacket because hands need something to do when a room is measuring them. The harpist hired for the cocktail hour sat frozen, half-turned, as if sound could be caught by staying perfectly still. The MC, 2 steps off stage, flicked his script and put on the face you wear when a segment goes viral on you by accident. "I don't need your money," Samuel said, and you could feel 50 people tense the way people do when they think they're about to watch a person make the wrong kind of stand. "But I'll take your terms." Eleanor lifted an eyebrow. "No money? That's a first at the Grand Hall." "I'll take the instrument," he said, "if the room stands in silence. And the year—" He glanced at the staff line again. "The year doesn't buy me out. It buys time to build something. A place where kids can touch an instrument before they're told what rooms they don't belong in." The line drew itself in the air. It wasn't a speech. He didn't have time to invent one. It was what he had, said clean, like a cloth wrung once. "Adorable," someone murmured in a tone that means the opposite. The guard inhaled to begin the reminder again. Stage, policy, guess. But beside him a critic with wire-rimmed glasses cleared his throat softly. "Let him try." 3 words placed like a wedge. Not loud, precise. Eleanor didn't look pleased to have the rhythm taken from her hand. "We have a schedule," she said, still smiling. "We also have 100 years of tradition that says there is no art without risk. And that is how rooms decide things. A sentence polished enough to reflect everyone's best self back at them wins the vote." The schedule sighed and shifted. A path opened that hadn't been there a minute earlier. Samuel stepped onto the runners that led up to the platform. White tape marks blinked underfoot like all the times he had told others where to place their things. From the front row, a donor whispered, "Watch him quit when he feels the lights." From the staff line, the server's hand tightened on the tray until one glass chimed against another. He stopped at the first stair, turned slightly. "I need a condition," he said. The room enjoyed that. "Of course you do," Eleanor said, gracious as a blade. "Name it." "For the minute," Samuel said, looking past her to the donors. "If we're testing silence, give silence a chance. Phones down, no filming." He let the suggestion breathe. "You invited me into your light. Meet me in the dark for 1 minute." A ripple. Not all of it friendly. Influencers don't come to a room like this to lower their phones. but a few lowered them anyway, because curiosity is stronger than habit if you scratch it just right. The critic slid his own into a jacket pocket and nodded, like a metronome setting the first beat. On the balcony, a young woman mouthed, 60 seconds, to her friend, grinning, already drafting a caption in her head for when the minute was up. Eleanor let the pause lengthen just enough to prove she controlled it. 1 minute, she said. Then the world returns. Then the world returns, Samuel agreed. He climbed the last 2 steps. Up close, the velvet around the stand was a shade darker, like night water. The case sat there, more history than object. You could feel the sound of older rooms inside it, parlors and rain, and people no one remembers until a bow finds the sweet part of a string and says their names again by accident. Samuel didn't touch the case. He set his palm on the lip of the stage instead, as if confirming that wood could hold him. Someone coughed. Glass breathed against glass. In the back, a door clicked, a small, ordinary thunder of a room being alive. You have 30 seconds to get it out of your system, he said, not unkind. After that, we try. The MC, relieved to have a role, counted the half-minute with a flourish, because men with clipboards need to contribute somehow. At 10, the sound in the hall slid lower by itself. At 5, the guard stopped trying to look like furniture and became a person again, hands loose. At 2, the last phone that was going to go black went black. Time, the MC whispered, and even his whisper came out like it was on a mic. Samuel closed his eyes for the length of a breath the body takes before it lifts a weight. Opened them. He didn't bow. He didn't perform a saint. He simply stood. And in the standing, he asked a question you don't have to use words to ask. Will you meet me where sound begins? Inside the quiet? The first 10 seconds weren't silence. They were the noise of people hunting for it, the mind still twitching, the throat remembering it owns a cough. At 12 seconds, something gave. At 16, the room settled an inch, the way a sleeping person's chest does when sleep deepens. At 22, someone tried to take a secret picture and got the task of a date who wanted to belong to a moment for once without proof. At 29, you could hear the old building breathe. It's strange what a minute can do. In a hospital night shift, it is the difference between catching a bus and missing it. In a gala, it is an eternity you can't expense. In a life, it can be the first time you've been allowed to occupy your own outline without apology. At 40 seconds, Eleanor's jaw eased, as if a muscle she'd trained for years finally lost the argument. At 46, the critic lowered his head and half smiled. Not at a performance, there wasn't one yet, but at the soft engineering of a man who understood rooms. At 52, the server who had whispered please earlier felt tears pinch and didn't drop a single glass. 60. He didn't point at the clock. He didn't say, there. He blinked once, and the blink felt like the end of a long note you didn't realize you'd been holding. The room exhaled as if it had been underwater and popped through to air. Applause tried to erupt, muscle memory, but something in the way Samuel lifted a hand kept it from becoming noise. He wasn't scolding them. He was saving the moment's edges so it wouldn't leak. Eleanor broke the spell because someone had to. Impressive theater, she said lightly, to keep the story livable for people who don't enjoy being surprised by those they were ignoring a minute ago. That was the easy part. Now you play. He looked at the violin case once more, and if you were near, you saw the past touch the present across his face like a shadow from a passing cloud. Not nostalgia, inventory. What you carry, what you put down. Ms. Voss, he said, and the formality was respect, not surrender. You gave your word in front of witnesses. I'll hold you to it. A pocket of laughter, uncomfortable, brittle, cracked in the corner where brittle things gather. The critic didn't laugh. The guard didn't either. Samuel touched the velvet, just a fingertip against the nap. His hand didn't shake. Or if it did, it shook the way bridges do when freight crosses them. Not fear, physics. Behind you and me, out of frame, you could feel the internet prick up its ears. Even with the phones down, the room had the electricity of a clip being born. He set both hands on the case latches and did not open them. Not yet. Before I play, he said, before I earn anything in wood or wire, I want you to hear one thing from me. And he glanced past Wealth to the staff line again. And it's only this. I'm not here to embarrass anyone. Not my people. Not yours. I'm here to keep a word. He looked at Eleanor and waited. The best negotiations are sometimes just a man refusing to hurry. She lifted her chin, a fraction. Then prove it, she said. Samuel nodded, a small bow to no one and to everyone. Deal. The word clicked in the room like a latch. Years ago, before the weight of uniforms and name tags, before the quiet nods of strangers who never learned his name, Nathaniel Cross stood under the glow of stage lights that seemed brighter than the sun. He was 22, fresh from a conservatory where his professors had whispered about his touch, not just skill, but the way each note seemed to breathe under his fingers. His technique was a strange marriage of discipline and defiance, shaped by long nights practicing in the back of a closed church, where the old upright piano leaned slightly to one side, like a companion listening in on every secret. His first victory had been small, a regional competition in a drafty town hall where the prize was nothing more than a faded certificate and a handshake. But that handshake had come from a maestro whose approval could open doors. Nathaniel had walked home that night in the winter wind, clutching the paper as if it were a passport to another life. More victories followed, each one a step up the ladder, each one proof that the boy from the edge of the city could stand in the same light as anyone born into it. Then came the evening that began the slow erosion of that dream. A grand competition in the Capitol. Gold leaf balconies, velvet seats, judges whose names were whispered like they were carved into history itself. Nathaniel had played last. The piece had been a tempest, his own interpretation, running wild and precise in equal measure. When he finished, the hall had fallen into a silence so deep he could hear the hum of the stage lights. He'd known without doubt that he had played better than he ever had in his life. And then he saw the glance. One judge leaning to another, the quick nod toward a young man backstage. The kind of nod that carries decisions made long before a single note is played. When the winner was announced, it was not Nathaniel Cross. The applause felt like gravel thrown against glass. Later he would overhear it. It's already decided. He's from the family. It keeps the sponsors happy. It was not the first injustice in music, nor the last, but for Nathaniel it lodged like a stone in the center of his chest. Life does not pause for the brokenhearted. Weeks later, his mother fell ill. The kind of illness that speaks in numbers with too many zeros at the end of the bills. Nathaniel tried to juggle gigs, competitions, and hospital visits, but the debts grew faster than his reputation. Music became a luxury he could no longer afford. The day he pawned his piano, the shopkeeper had asked if he wanted to say goodbye to it. He had only nodded, because he knew if he sat down to play, he would never get back up. Years rolled on, and Nathaniel became what no one expected. A man who carried chairs, fixed stage lights, and swept the very floors where he had once been invited to perform. To most, he was just another quiet figure in the background. But his hands, they never forgot. The fingers still remembered every run, every chord, every silence between notes. Only now they also remembered loss. And loss had a way of making every movement heavier, more deliberate. Now standing in the side wing of the Whitfield Grand Hall, those same hands rested at his sides. They trembled, not with fear, but with a kind of restrained electricity. Out beyond the curtains, a low, restless murmur rolled through the audience. It was the same sound he remembered from years ago, before the announcement of a winner. Back then, it had been the sound of hope curdling into suspicion. Tonight, it was a living, breathing question mark, waiting to see what a man like Nathaniel Cross could possibly do. He inhaled slowly, tasting the air thick with perfume, wine, and the faintest trace of polished wood. Somewhere in that crowd was the person who had just thrown him a challenge meant to cut him down. Somewhere in that crowd, eyes were rolling, lips were curling into smirks. And somewhere, though they didn't know it yet, sat the first person who would recognize that this was not a man about to embarrass himself, but a man about to step back into the light he had been pushed from. Nathaniel flexed his fingers once. The tremor faded. It wasn't fear. It was power remembering its shape. The Whitfield Grand Hall was the kind of place built not just for sound, but for spectacle. Every surface gleamed, chandeliers spilling light like molten gold, mirrors catching and multiplying every shimmer from sequined gowns and polished cufflinks. The air was warm with the scent of roses brought in by the crate, layered over the darker notes of aged wine and expensive perfume. It wasn't just an event, it was a performance, even before a single note had been played. At the center of it all, beneath the largest chandelier, stood Vivian Hawthorne, billionaire, philanthropist on paper, predator in pearls in reality. She was a vision of controlled extravagance, a gown of midnight silk that whispered when she moved, diamonds at her throat that could have bought the building outright. Her voice carried that easy, dangerous charm that made people lean in without realizing they were being lured. Vivian lived for moments like this, where she could stand in the eye of a crowd and shape the air with her words. She had been speaking idly with a cluster of tech investors when her gaze landed on Nathaniel Cross in his stagehand's jacket, standing just off to the side, adjusting a mic stand. Something in the casual precision of his movements caught her attention. And then the idea bloomed, sharp and gleaming, like the click of a jeweled clasp. She raised her glass, drawing the attention of the nearby tables. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice sliced clean through the chatter, "I have a proposition." Instantly, cameras tilted toward her, the ambient noise shifting from conversation to curiosity. Vivian's smile curled, cat-like, as she gestured toward Nathaniel. "This gentleman here, what's your name?" "Nathaniel Cross," he said evenly. "Well, Mr. Cross," she said, the syllables wrapping around his name like silk over steel, "I have a challenge for you. If you can sit at that piano," she gestured to the gleaming Steinway on stage, "and play something that makes this entire hall fall silent, I will buy you the most expensive instrument in the world. And," she let the pause hang, the hook glinting before she said it, "I will see to it that you never have to work a day in a job like this again." A ripple of gas and delighted laughter moved through the room. Some clapped at the audacity, others smirked, already certain they were about to witness a humiliation worth recording. From every corner, the glow of phones multiplied. The front row, celebrities with the kind of faces that lived on magazine covers, leaned forward. In the balconies, lenses glinted like watchful eyes. Somewhere in the back, a blogger whispered to her phone, "This is going to be everywhere in 10 minutes. Vivian tilted her head, all mock courtesy. "Of course you don't have to accept. No shame in walking away." It was bait and blade in one. Nathaniel glanced at the piano. Its black lacquered surface reflected the light like a frozen lake. He had played a Steinway like that once, in another life. The weight in his chest shifted. "Do you agree to the terms?" Vivian pressed, her voice bright for the audience. the words meant for him alone. "I do," he said. The answer rolled through the room like a spark through dry tinder. Murmurs turned into open commentary. "He's going to embarrass himself. Maybe he's good. Doesn't matter. She'll win either way." The stakes were set now, carved into the moment. Vivian raised her glass again, as if sealing the deal. "Then please, Mr. Cross, the stage is yours." The cameras tracked him as he stepped out of the shadows, the low hum of conversation giving way to a tightening quiet. He approached the Steinway, his footsteps absorbed by the thick carpet, his reflection meeting him in the black curve of the instrument. He could feel the crowd's gaze pressing against his back, heavy with expectation, doubt, and the cruel delight of those waiting to see someone stumble. Nathaniel rested his fingertips on the polished edge of the piano, not yet the keys, just the surface, letting the texture anchor him. He looked out into the sea of faces, then back to the instrument. Somewhere beyond the light, Vivian Hawthorne was smiling, and then he pulled out the bench. Nathaniel slid onto the bench with the slow precision of someone stepping onto ice that might crack. He adjusted the height, not because it truly needed adjusting, but because it gave him 3 more seconds to breathe. The hall was a living organism now, full of rustles, coughs, the faint buzz of camera phones already recording. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the room, not hurried, not defensive, just steady. Then in a voice that carried without force, he said, "Before I start, I have one request. Turn off your phones. For 2 minutes, just listen. If I fail, you can post anything you want. Every stumble, every wrong note. But for 2 minutes," he let the pause sink in. "Let's try remembering what it's like to hear something without watching it through a screen." A ripple moved through the crowd, part amusement, part defiance. People glanced at each other, then at their devices. A few obediently slid their phones into their clutches or pockets. Others lowered them but kept the cameras running, screens dark but recording. From the balcony, someone chuckled. "2 minutes? Fine, let's see what you got." Nathaniel placed his hands on the keys. No warm-up runs, no showy arpeggios, just a single chord, low and resonant, like a door opening to a dimly lit room. Then another, building gently into a slow progression. The melody that emerged was almost painfully simple, 4 notes rising like a question, then falling just shy of an answer. It was not the brilliance of the technique that first caught the room. It was the space between the notes. He let them breathe, each one a small offering, each silence between them long enough to make the audience lean forward just to stay inside it. Somewhere in the third row, a laugh that had been bubbling in a man's throat dissolved into quiet. Near the back, a server paused with a tray in midair, watching. Vivian Hawthorne tilted her head, her smile fixed, but her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Then, without warning, the left hand shifted, the bass notes deepening into a syncopated pulse, the right hand unfurling a ribbon of melody that danced somewhere between a Chopin nocturne and a smoky jazz club at midnight. It was as if 2 worlds were speaking at once, one elegant, precise, wearing gloves, the other loose, warm, leaning against a street lamp under rain. Someone in the balcony whispered, "He's improvising," and the whisper carried down like a current. Phones began to rise again, stealthy, their tiny red lights winking in the dimness. But now they weren't pointed to mock. They were catching something people wanted to remember. Nathaniel's body leaned slightly into the keys, his left foot controlling the sustain like a second heartbeat. He threaded in a fragment of an old gospel hymn, bending it into something new, sliding from major to minor like water shifting temperature. Each time he set up a resolution, he dodged it, making the ear chase him, making the heart wait. By the end of the second minute, no one had laughed in over 100 seconds. The air felt held. And Nathaniel, feeling that weight, let the melody dissolve into a run so quick and liquid it might have been mistaken for a rehearsal flourish, except that each note landed exactly where it was meant to, a ladder he built and climbed in the same breath. When he finally paused, hands hovering over the keys, the silence that followed was heavier than the music itself. In that breathless stillness, Nathaniel smiled, not wide, just enough to let them know this was only the beginning. The final note lingered in the air like the last light of sunset, hovering, thinning, refusing to die until Nathaniel slowly lifted the pedal and let it fade into nothing. No applause. Not yet. The absence of sound was so complete it felt physical, as if someone had draped a thick velvet curtain over the room. In that silence, you could hear the faint hum of the chandeliers, the distant clink of a glass settling onto a tray in the far corner. Nathaniel didn't bow. He simply lowered his hands to his lap and sat there, breathing with the quiet, eyes not on the keys but on the people before him. A woman in the front row blinked hard, as if waking from a dream. A man in the balcony adjusted his tie, then, hesitant, almost awkward, rose to his feet. The motion caught the eye of the person beside him, who stood too. Then another, and another. The sound of fabric rustling filled the hall as more and more people rose, row by row, until the grand hall itself seemed to lift in unison. The applause began not with frenzy, but with certainty, hands coming together in slow, deliberate rhythm, the kind that says we mean this. Vivian Hawthorne, still seated, smiled her signature, measured smile, the one she'd perfected for boardrooms and gala photo calls. But her fingers, resting on the arm of her chair, tightened just enough to whiten the knuckles. Nathaniel's gaze found hers across the space. He didn't smirk, didn't challenge. He simply met her eyes as if to remind her of the promise she'd made, one the entire room had heard. A voice broke through the applause, strong and clear from somewhere in the middle rows. "Keep your word." It was followed by another, and then another. Soon the rhythm of the clapping was laced with a chant, soft at first, then swelling. "Keep your word. Keep your word." Vivian's smile never left her face, but her eyes flicked to the far corner, where her PR director stood, arms crossed tightly, already pulling out a phone. Across the aisle, a young man with a camera rig was live streaming to thousands, the comments on his feed spilling across his screen faster than he could read. The challenge. Keep your word. Nathaniel plays. In the balcony, someone yelled, "You promised him!" And the crowd erupted in cheers that rolled like a wave across the velvet and marble. Phones were everywhere now, held high, angling for Nathaniel, for Vivian, for the moment that was already being clipped, looped, and shared. By the time Vivian finally rose from her seat, the internet had its first million views. She walked toward the stage with the grace of someone used to owning whatever space she entered, heels clicking against polished wood, chin lifted just enough to suggest she was in control. But the chant didn't fade. Vivian stopped 2 paces from the piano, her expression poised for the cameras. Nathaniel turned on the bench to face her fully, waiting. The silence between them was brief, but it was enough for every phone in the room to capture the tension like a still frame. Somewhere in that sea of eyes and lenses, the story had already slipped from Vivian's hands. It belonged to the crowd now, and the crowd was hungry. Nathaniel's phone began buzzing before the sun was up, first in short bursts, then in a relentless vibration that seemed to echo in his bones. He tried to ignore it, pulling the blanket over his head, but the screen lit the dark of his small apartment like a lighthouse beam every few seconds. When he finally reached for it, the first thing he saw was a wall of unread notifications, texts, missed calls, social media tags. His sister's message sat at the top. You're everywhere. Half asleep, he clicked the first link she'd sent. It was him, shot from the balcony, his head bent toward the keys, that long pause before the opening note, the request to turn off the phones. The clip jumped to the end, his hands lifting, the silence, then the crowd rising. The caption burned bright in white text over black. She dared him. He answered. Beneath it, the hashtags rolled like a stock ticker. The challenge, keep your word. Shuck, Nathaniel plays. Grand Hall moment. He scrolled down and saw the same clip again from a different angle. Then again, edited with dramatic slow motion, the audio replaced by swelling cinematic strings. Someone had already turned his request, for 2 minutes, just listen, into a viral sound on TikTok. Thousands of videos were using it. Kids in bedrooms pretending to play piano, dogs tilting their heads at the sound, couples captioning it with "before I proposed." Twitter was worse, or better, depending on how you saw it. The night before, the challenge had been a ripple. Now it was the #1 trending topic worldwide. On one side, pure art. He shut the whole room up with 4 notes. Vivian Hawthorne better buy that man the moon. This is dignity. This is class. On the other, y'all acting like he cured cancer. It's just piano. Probably staged. Bet he's loving the attention. YouTube had already birthed analysis videos. The body language that shook a billionaire. Why that pause was genius. The psychology of humbling the rich. Each thumbnail was Nathaniel frozen mid-performance. Vivian blurred in the background. Meme accounts were on it too, photoshopping a grand piano into absurd places. The top of a skyscraper, the middle of a boxing ring, balanced on a tightrope with the caption, "Still better than her promises." Nathaniel closed the apps, tossed the phone onto the couch, and went to make coffee. He stared at the kettle as it boiled, the noise in his head refusing to quiet. The truth was, none of it felt real. Not the ovation, not the chance, not the fact that the whole world suddenly seemed to know his name. And yet, there was no piano in his apartment, no gleaming Steinway waiting for him, no call from Vivian Hawthorne, only the lingering echo of the night before and the sharp knowledge that she hadn't kept her word. By mid-morning, his voicemail was full. Local news wanted to hear his side. A morning talk show had offered to fly him out. A popular podcast promised a conversation that could change the culture. The last call came from a reporter who'd left a message both polite and urgent. "Mr. Cole, the public wants to know, what happens next?" Nathaniel deleted them all. He wasn't ready to be anyone's headline or moral symbol. Not yet. When the knock came at his door just after noon, he almost didn't answer. But through the peephole, he saw a young woman with a press badge around her neck, her hair pulled into a messy bun, holding a recorder. He opened the door just enough to speak. "Mr. Cole," she began, "I'm with the City Ledger. I wanted to ask—" "No interviews," Nathaniel said quietly, and started to close the door. She hesitated, then asked, "Not even to say whether she's contacted you?" He paused, met her eyes for the first time. "No interviews," he repeated. The door clicked shut. Behind it, he leaned against the wall, coffee gone cold on the counter, phone buzzing again on the couch. He had no piano, no deal, and, if he was honest, no idea how to steer the storm he'd walked into. Only one thing was certain. The internet had already decided its verdict, and it wasn't letting go. Nathaniel hadn't planned to see her again so soon, but the call came from an unlisted number, and the voice on the other end was Vivian Hawthorne's herself, smooth as glass, clipped as a command. "We should talk," she said. "Not on a stage, not in front of microphones. My office. Tonight." He almost laughed. "Your office? You've already seen the hall. You might as well see where the real power sits. When he arrived at Hawthorne Tower, the doorman didn't ask his name. He just stepped aside. The elevator was lined with dark walnut panels, the kind that swallowed light. It opened into a private floor. No reception desk, no assistants, just Vivian waiting beside a wall of glass that looked down over the city like it was hers. She didn't offer him a seat. "You're not here for a piano," she began. "Let's skip the performance." "No," Nathaniel said evenly. "I'm here for something that'll last longer than a piano." A faint smirk touched her lips. "Enlighten me." He stepped closer, close enough to see his reflection in the polished marble behind her. "You owe me nothing personally, but you owe something to every person you've ever stepped over. Last night wasn't about me, it was about what you made me stand for." Vivian folded her arms, her diamond bracelet catching the light like a warning. "And what exactly is the cost of that symbolism?" "Three things," Nathaniel said, holding up his fingers one by one. "First, the Hawthorne Fund for Young Musicians. Scholarships, instruments, tuition, run by an independent board. No photo ops, no PR strings attached." She arched an eyebrow. "That's a sizable ask." Second, 12 free concerts a year in communities that can't afford tickets. Full pay for every musician and crew member. You can sponsor it, or I'll find someone else who will. After all, your name's trending in every corner of the internet right now. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger but in calculation. "And third," his voice hardened, "you change your company's policies. End the staff out of sight rules. Call people by their names. Remove barriers that keep your employees hidden unless they're serving you." For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Not guilt, not agreement, but a faint discomfort, as though he'd stepped into a room she kept locked. "You think you can just walk in here and dictate how I run my business?" she asked, voice cool. "I think," Nathaniel said, "you can read the headlines. You can see the hashtags. You can hear the noise building outside your glass walls. And you can decide whether you want to be the villain who dared a janitor and lost, or the one who listened and changed." Vivian turned toward the window, the city lights stretching into the dark like a silent audience. "The media storm will pass," she said almost to herself. "Maybe," Nathaniel replied, "but the clips won't. The internet doesn't forget, and neither will the people in that room last night." There was a long pause, broken only by the distant hum of traffic far below. Then she exhaled, a slow, controlled release. "You want a fun, concerts, and policy reform?" "Yes. And in return? I don't sue you. I don't take interviews tearing you apart. I stand beside you when you announce it. Not as a prop," he fixed his gaze on her, "but as proof you kept your word." Her fingers tapped once against the marble. "You've got nerve, Nathaniel Cole." "I've got more than that," he said quietly. "I've got the room's attention. And right now, so do you." Vivian finally gestured to the leather chair across from her desk. "Sit. We'll see if we can make this palatable for both of us." As he sat, he caught her looking at him, not as the janitor from the night before, but as someone she couldn't quite box in. Somewhere in the city, the noise of hashtags and headlines kept rising, and here, behind glass, the real negotiation began. The flash of cameras hit Nathaniel's eyes before he even stepped onto the dais. Grand Hall's chandeliers blazed above, but the true light came from the clustered lenses and phone screens, aimed like artillery at the podium. Vivian Hawthorne walked out first, controlled steps, chin high, the practiced queen of her own kingdom. Nathaniel followed half a pace behind, not as a shadow, not as an ornament, but as a witness. The room was packed, rows of journalists, a handful of recognizable celebrities, company executives in sharp suits, and near the back, hotel staff in pressed uniforms, their name tags catching the light. Vivian adjusted the microphone. The murmurs died. She didn't glance at the notes on the podium. Instead, she looked straight into the crowd. Last week, she began, I disrespected Nathaniel Cole. I failed to call him by name. I treated a human being, an artist, as an accessory to my amusement. That was wrong. No hedging. No, if anyone was offended. The words I was wrong landed like a stone in still water. She let the silence breathe before continuing. This is not about charity. This is about responsibility. And today I am announcing changes that go beyond one evening. She raised a hand, counting them off. First, the Hawthorne Fund for Young Musicians, fully independent board with its first $1 million endowment today. Applications open next month. There was a murmur from the press pool, the frantic scribble of pens. Second, 12 free concerts a year in underserved communities. Full union pay for musicians and crew. Mr. Cole will open the first performance. Nathaniel didn't move, didn't nod. He simply let her words anchor into the air. Third, effective immediately, we are abolishing our staff out of sight policy. Every employee will be addressed by name. Service elevators will be open in all non-security areas. Managers who refuse will no longer be managers here. A ripple of surprise swept through the back of the room. Small smiles, straightened shoulders among the staff. Fourth, we are raising our minimum wage to match the city's true living wage and adding health stipends for night shift workers, effective next quarter. Gasps from some executives. A few looked as if they'd swallowed lemons. Fifth, monthly listening sessions with frontline staff, with an anonymous feedback channel direct to the executive board. The first session will be this coming Monday at 9 a.m. I will be there. She lowered her hand. This is not about optics. This is about changing the way we operate, when the cameras are on and when they are not. A reporter shot up. Ms. Hawthorne, are you admitting discrimination? Vivian didn't blink. I am admitting bias exists, in my organization and in me. I take responsibility for fixing it. The room shifted. Some eyes softened. Others narrowed, weighing the sincerity against decades of power. She turned slightly toward Nathaniel. Mr. Cole, would you like to speak? He stepped to the microphone, voice steady but quiet enough to make the room lean in. I don't need a grand gesture. I need to see these promises kept. This is a start. He looked at the back row, at the staff in their uniforms. When the applause fades, the work begins. I'll be here for that part too. Then he stepped back. No drama, no bow. Just enough to mark his presence without stealing the focus. As the questions began to fly, cameras flashing in bursts, Nathaniel caught the smallest thing, Vivian's hand resting on the podium edge, not gripping it, but steadying herself. She had said I was wrong into a room that would remember it forever. And outside these walls, the internet was already cutting clips, choosing which version of this day the world would see. The first application to the Hawthorne Fund landed in Nathaniel's inbox just after dawn. It wasn't polished, just a scanned handwritten letter from a boy in Queens named Elijah. 16 years old, practiced on a second-hand keyboard missing 3 keys. His mother worked double shifts at a laundromat. His father was gone. He'd enclosed a phone recording, scratchy, full of background traffic, but the phrasing, the pauses, the way the notes breathed, it made Nathaniel's chest tighten. By noon, there were dozens more. A girl from the Bronx who played violin in subway stations to save for college. A refugee from Syria who taught himself clarinet by watching YouTube tutorials in the public library. None of them had the connections Nathaniel once lacked. Now they had a door to knock on. Vivian didn't just sign the checks. She read every application. It startled her staff. She began spending her mornings in the conference room with the blinds open, sleeves rolled up, glasses perched low. She asked questions about practice hours, family situations, favorite composers. Somewhere between the board meetings and gala planning, she'd started listening. The press still circled, waiting for the shine to wear off. But instead of hiding, Vivian leaned into the work. She attended planning sessions for the first free concert, Keys for Tomorrow, in a repurposed church hall in Harlem. The place smelled faintly of wood polish and old hymnals. The stage was small, but the acoustics. Nathaniel stood in the center and clapped once, listening to the warm echo. Perfect. Flyers were taped to lampposts. Free concert, all welcome. No corporate logo dominating the page, just a clean line. Presented by the Hawthorne Fund. Vivian insisted on paying the ushers and sound crew union rates out of her own pocket. Behind the scenes, she asked Nathaniel for advice. Real advice, not PR polish. What should we do if people come who've never been to a concert before? She asked one night after a rehearsal. Don't treat them like guests, he said. Treat them like owners. This is their hall for the night. Vivian paused, then nodded. Owners, I can do that. The rehearsal itself was unlike any she'd attended. No tuxedos, no evening gowns, just a mix of young musicians in worn jeans, some barefoot, some in sneakers, all laser-focused. Nathaniel moved among them like a quiet conductor, adjusting a bow grip here, suggesting a tempo shift there. Vivian noticed something. His corrections were always paired with encouragement. No one left his side smaller than they'd arrived. The night before the concert, Vivian found herself pacing the empty hall. She remembered the first time she'd seen Nathaniel. Just a man in work clothes, half hidden behind a piano, an easy target for her arrogance. The thought made her stomach turn. That version of herself felt like someone else entirely, someone she didn't want back. She stopped pacing and sat in the back row, trying to see the hall through Elijah's eyes, or the Syrian clarinetists, or the violinist from the subway. This was more than music. It was proof that the invisible could be seen, that doors could open without permission slips from the powerful. And for the first time in years, Vivian Hawthorne realized she was nervous. Not about losing face, but about living up to something worth keeping. The doors opened at 6, and the line already curled around the block. Teenagers in hoodies, mothers with toddlers balanced on their hips, old men leaning on canes, night shift nurses still in scrubs. Nobody wore black tie, nobody checked names. When Vivian walked through the lobby, she caught snatches of quiet awe. It's free? You can just walk in? They said anyone could come. Inside, the hall was small, the kind where you could see the scuffs on the floorboards and smell the faint trace of coffee from the volunteers' thermoses. The stage lights weren't dazzling, just warm enough to make the piano gleam like something alive. No velvet ropes, no VIP seating. Elijah sat in the second row, knees bouncing, clutching the acceptance letter from the Hawthorne Fund like a talisman. Backstage, Nathaniel flexed his fingers slowly, listening to the muffled hum of the crowd. This wasn't the grand hall. There were no crystal chandeliers, no paparazzi. But the air here had its own charge, full of small, unspoken stories. He stepped toward the stage entrance and caught sight of Darren, the security guard who'd once blocked his way months ago. Darren was out of uniform, sitting beside his teenage daughter. Their eyes met, and Darren gave a quick nod. It meant more than applause. Vivian stayed in the shadows, letting the music belong to someone else tonight. She'd traded her gown for a simple navy dress. In her lap, she held a folded program she'd read a dozen times, though she knew every note by heart. Nathaniel stepped into the light. No introduction, no flourish. Just the quiet scrape of the piano bench as he sat. He rested his hands above the keys and waited, not for silence, but for stillness, When it came, it was the kind that couldn't be demanded. The first notes were low, steady, 3 steps forward, 1 step back, like the slow walk of someone learning to trust the ground again. A hush rippled through the rows. The melody rose just enough to catch in the throat, then broke apart into fragments that felt like questions without answers. In the third movement, a shift, brighter chords, urgent runs, the left hand anchoring while the right leapt into spaces that seemed impossible, then landed clean. Vivian found herself holding her breath. Around her, she saw a janitor in a green uniform sitting straighter, a young mother rocking her baby to the rhythm, an elderly woman clutching a worn rosary and tapping her foot. Halfway through, Nathaniel slipped in a phrase, a shadow of the piece he'd played the night of the challenge, but transformed, softer. Not a defiance now, but an offering. He thought of every person who'd been made invisible, himself among them, and shaped the notes so they carried weight without bitterness. When the final chord came, he let it ring, fading into the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. He stood but didn't bow. Instead, he looked out over the hall, meeting as many eyes as he could, and said softly, but enough to carry, "This one was for those who weren't invited, until tonight." The applause began slowly, not the sharp bursts of a gala, but a rolling wave, building until it filled the room. People stood, not because they were told, but because something in them needed to. Elijah's mother wiped her eyes. Darren's daughter clapped until her hands stung. Even the volunteers in the back put down their trays to join in. Vivian rose too, though she kept her gaze on Nathaniel. This was the moment she'd promised, to keep her word through action, not just headlines. And as the sound swelled, she realized the night didn't belong to her, or even to him. It belonged to everyone who had finally, undeniably, been seen. When the noise softened, Nathaniel closed the piano lid and stepped down into the crowd. There was no backstage retreat this time. He walked slowly toward the exit, shaking hands, hearing names, listening. And in that small hall, under plain lights, the music of a second chance kept playing. In the way people looked at one another differently, as if a door had been left open and nobody was in a hurry to close it. The crowd had thinned, the folding chairs already half stacked, when Nathaniel stepped back into the dimly lit hall. He'd been in the corridor, shaking hands, answering a few quiet thank yous, but now it was almost empty, except for Vivian, who stood near the stage with her coat over her arm, looking at the piano like it had just told her a secret. She didn't turn when she said, almost to herself, "You kept your word." Nathaniel walked to the foot of the stage, resting his palm on the worn wood of the first step. "We both did." She looked down at him then, not with the polished smile she used for cameras, but with something unguarded. "It's harder than I thought. Not the money, not the changes, the listening." He tilted his head. "The hardest promises are the quiet ones, the ones nobody notices unless you break them." Vivian stepped down the stage steps slowly, as if each creak under her heel was a sentence in a conversation only they could hear. When she stood beside him, she didn't offer her hand for a shake. Instead, she said, "What you played tonight, it wasn't just music." "No," Nathaniel agreed. "It was the thing that comes after music, when the notes stop and people have to decide what to do next." They walked toward the side exit together. The volunteers were still packing away cables. A janitor in a gray sweater swept confetti-like scraps of program paper into a dustpan. Vivian paused to thank him, calling him by name, and Nathaniel noticed the small flicker of surprise on the man's face. Then the nod, quick but real. Outside, the air was crisp, holding that fragile stillness that only comes after a gathering has truly ended. Across the street, a corner deli still had its neon open sign buzzing faintly. The city felt smaller here, almost gentle. Vivian pulled her coat tighter. Tomorrow, the press will find a way to spin this. They'll try to make it about PR again. Nathaniel glanced at her. Let them. The people who were here know what they saw, and they'll carry it further than headlines ever could. For a moment, they just stood there, watching their breath in the cold. Then Vivian said, I don't know if I'll ever be finished with this. Maybe that's the point. It is, Nathaniel said simply. She smiled, faint but honest. Good night, Nathaniel. He nodded. Good night, Vivian. She turned and walked toward the waiting car at the curb, but halfway there she stopped and looked back, not to wave, just to make sure he was still there. He was, and then she got in, the door shutting with a soft click, the car pulling away into the night. Nathaniel stood for another moment, hands in his pockets, the echo of the hall's last chord still somewhere in his chest. Then he turned and began walking, not toward the subway, not toward any fixed address, but into the weave of streets that would take him wherever the next promise waited to be kept. Behind him, the hall lights dimmed, but the music, unwritten now, lingered in the walls. It would stay there until the next time someone needed it. Dignity has no uniform. It has courage, and a promise is only worth the actions that keep it.
If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you won't miss what's next.